I remember the exact moment when I realized that my connection to the San Francisco 49ers was no longer just curiosity. It happened on an evening when the sky over the bay looked like a blend of fading gold and deepening blue. I was standing on a quiet overlook above the city, listening to the distant hum of traffic and the soft rustle of the wind against the hillside. The lights below flickered like scattered embers, and in that soft glow, I felt something familiar yet unspoken calling to me. I had known the team as a symbol, a legacy, a name carried through generations. But that night, it became something deeper. It became personal. I walked down the path toward the old stadium grounds, letting the cool air settle around my thoughts. The field itself was empty, silent, almost solemn, as if holding its breath in anticipation of a story waiting to be uncovered. I had been here before, but this time it felt different. The silence felt alive. I sensed memories beneath the surface, fragments of voices, bursts of energy from games played long ago, and echoes of crowds that once roared with unshakable loyalty. These faint reflections drifted toward me like distant signals from the past. I stopped near the edge of the field and looked across the turf. The fading light stretched long shadows across the ground, and I imagined the players who must have stood there decades earlier, unaware that their struggles, choices, and sacrifices would someday shape a legacy far larger than they ever imagined. That thought stayed with me as I closed my eyes for a moment. I pictured the world they lived in, the challenges they faced, and the moments that pushed them to keep moving despite uncertainty. I wanted to feel what they felt. I wanted to understand their journey. As I breathed in the cool air, I realized that the story of this team was not simply a timeline of victories and losses. It was a story of identity, a story of transformation, a story built through the persistence of people who refused to let failure define them. The 49ers were born in a city that had always been defined by reinvention. Gold seekers, dreamers, builders, artists, innovators, all had walked the same streets. They came searching for something that felt just out of reach, and somehow the essence of that longing, that relentless pursuit of possibility, had woven itself into the fabric of the team that carried the city's name. I took a few slow steps across the edge of the field, letting the grass brush lightly against my shoes. The whispers of history grew stronger, forming into images that felt more vivid. I saw the earliest fans who showed up not knowing what to expect, but believing in something they could not yet describe. I saw the coaches who worked late into the night, hoping to carve out a vision in a league still defining itself. I saw players who played for little more than pride and the slim chance of building a better future. Each of these people had left a mark on the story, shaping it long before the world began to pay attention. The idea of legacy is strange. You do not always know when it begins. You do not always see the moment when an ordinary decision becomes part of a larger destiny. But as I stood there, I began to sense that the team's earliest days, quiet, uncertain, imperfect, were exactly what made the story powerful. Every dynasty begins in the shadows. Every triumph grows from struggle. And the 49ers were no exception. As the sky darkened and the city lights grew brighter, I felt a shift inside me. I realized that I was not here merely to observe the past. I was here to walk through it, moment by moment, as if tracing footsteps left behind by those who built the foundation of this franchise. Something in the air told me that the story I was stepping into would not be simple. It would be layered with emotion, shaped by perseverance, and filled with turning points that would define the identity of not only the team, but the people who followed it. The breeze carried a faint chill as I stood in the middle of the field. The quiet felt heavy with anticipation, as if I were standing in the opening chapter of a long journey. The story was waiting for me to follow it. I felt ready to let the memories guide me, ready to uncover the rise, the heartbreaks, the breakthroughs, and the moments that shaped everything. Standing there, surrounded by the echoes of history, I whispered to myself that this was where the story would begin, and with that quiet promise, I stepped forward into the past. I began my search for the earliest roots of the 49ers story by stepping back into the atmosphere of a very different San Francisco. The air felt heavier in my imagination, filled not with the rush of modern life, but with the echoes of a city still shaping its identity. I walked through memories of narrow streets, wooden storefronts, and voices that blended ambition with uncertainty. This was a city rebuilt from hardship, molded by people who arrived carrying hope more than possessions. And somewhere in that spirit, the first seeds of the team's legacy were planted long before anyone ever lined up on a football field. I closed my eyes and pictured the late 1940s, a period where the world was recovering from the weight of war. The city was alive with rebuilding, striving, and redefining itself. Life moved slower, but dreams moved fast. Hidden in that restless energy was a man whose vision seemed almost too bold for the time. His name was Tony Morabito, and he carried an idea that many believed was impossible. He wanted to bring professional football to the West Coast. At a time when the sport was centered thousands of miles away, when leagues and owners saw the Pacific side of the country as an afterthought, Morabito dared to imagine something different. I pictured him sitting in an office cluttered with paperwork, the soft ticking of a clock drifting through the room. I imagined him leaning forward with determination as he tried to convince others that San Francisco deserved its own team. He must have felt alone during those moments. He must have faced doubt from every direction. But what stood out to me was not the resistance he faced, but the belief he carried. A belief that this city, with its spirit of reinvention and resilience, could support a team that would one day stand among the best. The 49ers were born into the All-America Football Conference in 1946. I imagine their first practices, the players gathering on a modest field with equipment that would look primitive by today's standards. They were not surrounded by photographers or national broadcasts. There were no massive stadiums or worldwide attention. It was simple. It was raw. It was the beginning of something that no one yet understood. These early players carried more than a football. They carried the weight of proving that professional football could thrive on the West Coast. I tried to picture what their days must have looked like. Many worked jobs outside of football. They practiced in cold winds that swept in from the bay. They learned to trust each other quickly because they had no choice. Their ambition was stronger than their circumstances. They had to be tougher, more determined, more adaptable. Every play they ran was a testament to their belief that they were part of something worth building. The more I imagined these early seasons, the more I understood that the story was not just about forming a team. It was about forming an identity. The 49ers were named for the miners who had once rushed into California with dreams of striking gold. It was a name chosen with purpose, a reflection of courage and risk, and the willingness to dig for something valuable even when the odds were low. That name carried a legacy before the first game was ever played. And as I thought about it, I realized how fitting it was. The early players and coaches were miners in their own way. They were digging through adversity, searching for success in a place where few expected it to be found. I imagined the team's first games, the stands filled with fans who were curious, hopeful, and unsure of what to expect. Some came out of loyalty to their city. Others came because they sensed they were witnessing the beginning of something new. I pictured families bundled up against the chill of the bay breeze, leaning forward in anticipation as the players took the field. There must have been nerves. There must have been excitement. There must have been a shared understanding that no matter what the outcome, they were part of a new chapter in the city's story. Those early games were not flawless. The team struggled at times, but they also showed flashes of brilliance. A long run that sent the crowd into a roar. A hard tackle that shifted the momentum of the game. A narrow victory that hinted at their potential. I imagine the players walking off the field after those early wins, feeling both relief and pride. They were proving something, not only to the league, but to themselves. And as I walked deeper into the past,
I began to see how the city embraced the team. There was something honest about their effort, something real. San Francisco was a place where people understood struggle. They understood hard work. They understood the long road towards success. And so they were drawn to this team that represented those same values. The bond formed quietly, strengthening with each season. There were moments in those early years that became turning points, even before the major turning point of the franchise arrived. A coach making a bold decision, a player stepping up in a crucial moment, a game that shifted public perception. These were not the moments that history books highlight, but they mattered. They shaped the foundation. They set the tone. They built the confidence that the team would later rely on during their rise. I imagine Tony Morabito watching from the stands, seeing his dream come to life. He must have felt both pride and pressure. Pride because the team existed at all. Pressure because he knew the responsibility of sustaining it. I pictured him standing with hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the field, trying to see not just the game in front of him, but the future that might be possible. His vision had brought the team into existence. Now the team had to prove that vision right. The more I thought about those years, the more I realized that the story of the 49ers could not be told without honoring these early chapters. They held the roots of everything that would follow. They revealed the character of the franchise before the world came to know it. They taught the team how to endure, how to adapt, how to believe. And as I stepped back into the present, I felt a deep respect for the people who had shaped these beginnings. Their efforts were quiet but powerful. Their struggles were real but necessary. And because of them, the team was ready for what the future would bring. The past had laid the foundation. Now the story was ready to rise.
As I moved deeper into the story, I felt the pace of the past quicken. The early years had built a foundation, but the true rise of the team began with a shift that felt almost like a growing pulse beneath the surface. I imagined the city in the mid-years of the century, a place filled with motion, invention, and change. The winds off the bay carried the sounds of construction, conversation, and ambition. It was as if the city itself was preparing for something larger, and the team that carried its name was beginning to reflect that same forward push. I pictured the practice fields where the players gathered each day, still far from the modern complexes we know now. The grass was uneven in places, the air sometimes cold enough to sting the skin, and the equipment modest compared to what would come later. Yet the players moved with growing purpose. Their steps felt firmer. Their voices carried more certainty. They had survived their first seasons, learned from their early struggles, and now stood ready to build something real. I imagined the sound of cleats hitting the ground as players ran drills that pushed them to their limits. The thud of impact during tackling exercises felt heavy in my mind. Coaches shouted encouragement and correction in equal measure, shaping the raw potential of the roster into something sharper. These practices were not glamorous. There were no cameras, no national coverage, no outside praise, only sweat, effort, and the belief that each day could bring them closer to excellence. The connection between the team and the city grew stronger during these rising years. I pictured fans filling the stands of their home games with a loyalty that felt almost defiant. They did not cheer out of habit. They cheered because they believed in the direction the team was moving. Each game brought a new surge of energy. The city saw glimpses of the future. They saw an identity forming. I imagine crowds leaning forward with excitement as a young player broke free for a long run, or as a defender made a play that shifted the momentum of a close contest. Some seasons brought heartbreak, others brought hope, but all of them contributed to the rise. I imagine coaches gathering late at night, reviewing film until their eyes grew tired. They studied every mistake, every missed opportunity, every promising moment that hinted at a path forward. They understood that greatness was not a single step. It was a long climb built from small improvements and difficult lessons. There were players who stood out during these years, men who became the pillars of the growing identity. Their names were spoken with respect inside the locker room. They worked when no one was watching. They led through quiet example. They gave strength to the team when doubt threatened to creep in. I pictured them arriving early for practice,
taping their hands with careful focus, warming up under the dim morning light. They carried a belief that the team could rise higher than what history had shown so far. I imagined one game in particular, a close contest against a powerful opponent. It was the kind of game that tested everything the team had learned. The crowd roared with a mix of nerves and excitement as the score tightened. The players moved with urgency, their breaths forming soft clouds in the cool air. The tension felt thick. I imagined the final minutes of that game where a single decision changed the direction of the season. A bold call, a perfectly timed throw, a defensive stand that pushed the crowd into a frenzy. These were the kinds of games that shaped belief. They showed the team that they belonged among the best. The rise was slow, but it was steady. I could feel the team gaining confidence with each passing year. They learned to trust their coaches. They learned to trust each other. They learned to trust the growing bond they shared with the city. This trust became the backbone of their identity. It carried them through injuries, setbacks, and the pressure of rising expectations. I imagine the locker room after a hard-fought win. The players sat catching their breath, their jerseys damp with sweat, their faces carrying a mix of exhaustion and pride. Coaches walked between the lockers, offering a nod or a quiet word. The room felt alive with purpose. The team knew that they were improving, even if the world had not yet recognized their growth. The city felt the change as well. Conversations about the team became more frequent. Children wore the colors of the team with growing excitement. Families gathered around radios or early televisions to follow each game. The rise of the team gave the city something to rally around, something to believe in. It was not just sports. It was identity. It was hope in motion. I imagined walking through the streets during those seasons, hearing the murmurs of fans discussing the latest game. Some spoke of the new players who added energy to the roster. Others discussed coaching strategies with pride or frustration. It was clear that the team mattered to the people. Their rise mirrored the spirit of the city in a way that only sports can capture. The ups and downs brought people together, creating a bond that grew with each passing year. What struck me most was how the team handled adversity during this rise. There were losing streaks that tested their spirit. There were injuries that forced unexpected changes. There were games where everything seemed to fall apart. Yet the team continued forward. They learned to face setbacks not with panic, but with resilience. They adjusted. They improved. They kept their focus on the long path ahead. As I reached the end of this part of the journey, I felt the momentum of the story building. The early years had set the stage, the rising action had strengthened the foundation, and now the air around the story felt charged with possibility. The team stood on the edge of something new, something greater. They had grown through experience, they had found their identity, they had earned the respect of the city, and they were ready for the moment that would shift everything. The turning point was approaching, carried by the momentum of their rise. The story felt like a wave gaining height, preparing to break. I could feel its energy as if it were moving through the ground beneath my feet. The next chapter would bring a shift that would define not only the team, but the future of the franchise. And as I stepped forward, I felt the excitement and tension that always comes before a transformation.
The turning point did not arrive with sudden noise or dramatic flashes of light. It came quietly at first, like a shift in the wind that few notice until it becomes impossible to ignore. As I stepped into this part of the story, I felt the atmosphere change. The rise had carried momentum, but now I sensed something deeper forming beneath it. It was the feeling that the team was no longer searching for direction, they were finding it. They were discovering the leadership, the vision, and the unity that would transform them into something far greater than they had ever been before. I imagined the days leading up to this transformation. The city was growing, evolving, shaping itself into a modern force. The energy of progress filled the streets, and people spoke with excitement about the future. That same current flowed into the heart of the team. The players felt it. The coaches felt it. Even the fans sensed that the path ahead was about to change. There was an anticipation that rose with each passing day, creating a tension that felt both thrilling and uncertain. The turning point began with leadership. I pictured a moment when the organization made a decision that rippled through every layer of the team. A new coach stepped in with a different mindset, a different voice, and a clear understanding of what needed to be done. He was calm but demanding, confident but grounded. He carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who knew exactly what excellence required. When he entered the locker room for the first time, I imagined the players straightening up, sensing the shift immediately. He did not speak with dramatic tones or long speeches. Instead, he spoke with clarity. He outlined expectations that were higher than anything the team had faced. He spoke about discipline, precision, and unity. He spoke about building something that would last. And as the players listened, I imagined them realizing that this was not another temporary change. This was the moment the identity of the franchise would begin to reshape itself around a new standard. The practices under this new leadership felt different. The pace increased. The drills became sharper. The margin for error shrank. Players who had once relied on instinct learned to embrace calculation. Those who had carried doubt began to carry belief. The coaches pushed them, not out of frustration, but out of understanding. They saw the potential in every player and refused to accept anything less than the full expression of it. I imagined the practice field under the warm glare of afternoon sunlight, the faint haze of drifting fog approaching from the bay. The players moved with urgency, their voices echoing with determination. The coaches walked along the sideline with focused expressions. Every step the players took seemed to carry more weight. They were no longer shaping a team, they were shaping a future. What made this turning point so powerful was not a single decision, but the accumulation of decisions that formed a new way of thinking. A new quarterback entered the picture, carrying confidence and vision. A defensive leader stepped forward with intensity and command. Younger players found their roles. Veterans offered guidance. The team was no longer a collection of individuals. They were becoming a unified force, bound by shared purpose. I imagined the locker room during this time. There was noise, but it was purposeful noise. The sound of tape being pulled tight around wrists, the clatter of cleats against the floor, the steady rhythm of players preparing in silence, visualizing the battles ahead. The scent of fresh grass mixed with sweat and determination. The air felt charged, as if every breath carried the electricity of transformation. I imagined a moment when the coach addressed the team before a critical game. The room fell silent. He spoke about trust. He spoke about the importance of every choice, every detail, every second on the field. He reminded them that the turning point did not happen when others believed in them. It happened when they believed in themselves. The players listened not with uncertainty, but with conviction. They were ready. The game that defined this turning point came like a wave of intensity. The crowd filled the stadium, carrying the weight of hope on their shoulders. The players stepped onto the field with a new sense of identity. I imagined the quarterback scanning the defense with calm precision. I imagined the receivers moving with sharp purpose, knowing exactly where to be. I imagined the defense standing tall, their eyes locked on to their assignments. The first quarter was tense. The game moved fast. Mistakes were punished quickly. But the team did not panic. They adjusted. They communicated. They remained steady. This was the mark of transformation. In previous years, frustration might have taken hold. Fear might have crept in. But now the players stood firm, anchored by the belief that they had been forged for moments like this. Then came the sequence that changed everything. A series of plays executed with flawless timing and precision. A long pass placed perfectly into the hands of a receiver who sprinted down the sideline as the crowd erupted. A defensive stand that crushed the hopes of the opposing offense. A field goal driven cleanly through the posts. Each moment tightened their grip on the game. Each moment solidified their identity. When the game ended, the players walked off the field not with wild celebration, but with quiet confidence. They knew they had crossed a threshold. The turning point had become real. The team that once struggled to define itself was now stepping into a new era, an era built on discipline, unity, and belief. I imagined the coach walking slowly down the tunnel, taking one final look at the field. He knew this was only the beginning. He knew the next chapters would bring greater challenges, greater pressure, and greater expectations. But he also knew that the foundation had finally been set. The turning point had given the team direction. Now, they had to follow it towards something extraordinary. As I stepped out of that chapter of memory, I felt the energy shift again.
The rise was behind them. The turning point had been claimed, and now the path ahead was clear. It led directly to the storm of greatness that waited in the next chapter. The story had reached the moment when everything was about to ignite.
The storm did not arrive with hesitation. It came with force, confidence, and the unmistakable energy of a team stepping fully into its power. As I moved into this chapter of the story, I felt the momentum that had been building finally rush forward. The rise had shaped them. The turning point had defined them. Now the team stood at the edge of a season that would not simply test them, but reveal them. There was a sense of inevitability in the air, as if every lesson learned, every step taken, and every hardship endured had prepared them for what was about to unfold. I imagined the first morning of training camp for the season that would change everything. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden light across the field. The players walked out with a certainty that had not existed before. Their movements were sharper, their voices sounded stronger. They carried themselves like a group that understood exactly what they were capable of. There was no arrogance in their posture, only purpose. This was the season they had been building toward for years. The practices were grueling, but there was something different about them. The players no longer needed constant reminders or corrections. They pushed each other with a shared understanding that excellence was the only acceptable outcome. I imagined the offense running play after play, the timing crisp and the precision unmistakable. The quarterback's passes cut through the air with confidence. The receivers moved with a kind of grace that could only come from trust in their own ability and trust in the system that guided them. The defense was a storm of intensity. I pictured the linemen exploding off the snap with power, the linebackers reading plays with instinctual clarity, and the secondary closing gaps with speed and focus. There was a rhythm to their movement, a kind of synchronized aggression that felt unbreakable. They were not just trying to stop opponents, they were trying to dominate them. When the season began, the league felt the shift immediately. The 49ers did not step onto the field as underdogs or hopeful contenders. They stepped on as a force. I imagined the first game unfolding with a kind of controlled violence. The offense struck quickly, moving the ball down the field with a clarity that left the opposing defense scrambling. The quarterback released passes before defenders had time to react. The running game carved through gaps with determination. The crowd roared with recognition. They had seen glimpses of this potential before, but now they were witnessing the full expression of it. The defense followed suit. They swarmed the backfield. They disrupted every rhythm the opponent tried to find. I imagine the sound of pads colliding, the roar of the crowd as a defender broke through the line for a crucial sack, the sudden gasp from the stadium when a defensive back leapt into the air for an interception. Everything about their performance felt deliberate and powerful. They were not just winning games, they were sending a message. Week after week, the momentum grew. The team showed resilience through tough games and dominance through easy ones. I imagined the national media beginning to shift their tone. Analysts who once doubted the team now spoke with respect. Others who had always believed found themselves watching with pride. The team was not simply winning, they were redefining what it meant to play the game with precision and heart. One particular game stood out in my mind. A primetime matchup against a powerhouse opponent. The kind of game that could alter the trajectory of a season. The stadium was electric. The air carried a mixture of tension and excitement. Fans leaned forward in their seats, knowing they were about to witness something meaningful. The opening drive set the pace. The offense moved down the field with ease, slicing through the defense with a combination of speed and strategy. The quarterback released a deep pass that cut through the air in a perfect arc, landing smoothly into the hands of a receiver sprinting full speed toward the end zone. The stadium erupted. The opponent responded fiercely, fighting back with determination. The game became a battle of wills. Every play mattered. Every inch gained or lost felt significant. I imagined the players breathing heavily on the sidelines, eyes locked on the field, ready to step back into the storm. The coaches paced with intensity, scanning for weaknesses, preparing adjustments. The crowd roared with every big moment and fell silent with every setback. Then came the defining drive. The 49ers took the field with calm precision. The quarterback dropped back, scanning the field with complete control. The receivers moved with sharp purpose. The offensive line held firm. Play after play, the team advanced. And then, in a moment that felt like destiny, a perfectly timed pass sliced through the defense, landing in the hands of a receiver who slipped past the final defender and crossed the goal line. The stadium erupted into noise that shook the air. It was the kind of moment that defines an era. From that point on, the team carried themselves with unshakable belief. They knew who they were. They knew what they were capable of. The city felt it too. Conversations in homes, workplaces, and streets centered around the team's greatness. Children reenacted plays in parks. Adults argued about strategies and matchups. The excitement was contagious. The team had become more than a football team. They had become a symbol of the city's pride. I imagined the locker room late in the season. The players sat with a mixture of exhaustion and confidence. Coaches discussed game plans with precision. The energy in the room felt different now. It was not hopeful. It was determined. They were no longer chasing success. They were maintaining it. They were protecting a standard they had built. The playoffs arrived with the weight of expectation resting on every player's shoulders. Each game brought higher stakes, louder crowds, and fiercer opponents. But the team did not waver. They executed with steel focus. They made adjustments with clarity. They fought through the toughest moments with unity. And each triumph brought them closer to the ultimate stage. I imagine the night of the championship game. The sky above the stadium glowed with bright lights. The air carried the energy of thousands of voices. The players walked onto the field with a calm that felt almost unreal. They knew this moment. They had prepared for it their entire careers. When the game began, it was clear that they were ready. The offense moved with brilliance. The defense crushed momentum. The special teams executed flawlessly. Every moment carried the intensity of destiny. And as the final minutes ticked away, the team sealed their victory. When the final whistle sounded, the stadium erupted in a wave of noise that felt like the culmination of every step in their journey. I imagined players raising their arms, shouting for joy, collapsing in relief, or hugging teammates tightly. Confetti drifted through the air like gold dust. The city celebrated with a roar that echoed across the bay. They had reached the pinnacle. They had claimed greatness. And with that triumph, they forever shaped the identity of the franchise. The climax had arrived, powerful and unforgettable.
When the noise of celebration finally softened into the calm of the night, I felt the weight of everything the team had lived through settle into quiet clarity. The victory had been earned through years of struggle, transformation, and belief. Now, as I stepped into the final part of the story, I understood that the true meaning of their journey was not found only in the confetti or the roaring crowd. It was found in what remained after the cheers faded. Legacy does not live in the loudest moments. It lives in the quiet ones, the ones that come when the stadium is empty and the air is still. I pictured the empty field hours after the championship game. The seats were silent. The turf was marked with the imprint of cleats and the scattered remnants of celebration. The lights remained on, casting a warm glow across the quiet stadium. In that stillness, the field looked almost sacred. I imagined a lone staff member walking across the turf with soft footsteps, collecting stray towels and discarded tape, feeling the lingering presence of history. This space had held so much energy, so much heart, and now it held peace. I imagined the players in the locker room after the celebrations wound down, jerseys loosened, pads taken off, voices quiet as exhaustion finally surfaced. Some sat in silence, letting the reality settle in. Others smiled softly, knowing they had reached the height of what they once only dreamed of. I pictured a veteran player leaning back against his locker, staring at the ceiling with tired eyes. He had waited years for this moment, and now that it had arrived, it felt both overwhelming and profoundly calm. He had given everything he had, and now there was nothing left to prove. The coaching staff sat together in a small room nearby, eyes heavy but filled with satisfaction. Their work had been relentless, their expectations high, their commitment unwavering. I imagined the head coach taking a long breath, letting the weight of the season lift from his shoulders. He knew that championships were never guaranteed. He knew how fragile success could be. And yet, here they were, holding the trophy of a season that had pushed them to the very edge of their abilities.
He looked at his staff and saw pride, relief, and the quiet realization that they had shaped something extraordinary. Outside the stadium, the city continued to celebrate. Cars honked, voices echoed through the streets, and families spilled onto sidewalks with pride. I imagined a father holding his child on his shoulders, pointing to the glowing stadium in the distance. He told stories about the team's journey, stories that the child would remember for years. This victory was not just for the players, it was for the city, a reminder that greatness could rise from perseverance, unity, and belief. The identity of the 49ers had woven itself into the identity of San Francisco once again. As the weeks passed, the team transitioned from celebration to reflection. Some players stayed in town, taking quiet walks near the bay or spending time with their families. Others traveled home, carrying the memories of the season with them. I imagined a young player sitting by his window late at night, looking out at the faint glow of city lights. He held the medal he earned, turning it slowly in his hands. He knew this was only the beginning of his own journey. He wanted to honor what the veterans had built. He wanted to carry the torch forward. At the training facility, the trophy was placed in a glass case with careful reverence. It stood as a symbol not of a single season, but of the hundreds of decisions, sacrifices, and moments that had formed the path to victory. I imagine players walking by it on their way to meetings or workouts. Some paused to look at it for a moment, letting its presence remind them of what was possible. Others walked by with quiet determination, knowing the weight of expectations had now grown. The coaching staff began planning for the future. Championship or not, the work never truly stopped. I imagine them gathered in a meeting room, reviewing roster decisions, discussing upcoming strategies, and planning improvements. The walls carried the memories of their journey, but they knew that resting on the past was not an option. Greatness had to be protected. It had to be chased again, year after year. The city evolved as well. Murals appeared on buildings depicting iconic moments from the season. Shops sold posters and jerseys adorned with the championship year. Conversations about the team echoed through the streets, creating a shared sense of pride. The victory became part of the city's rhythm, a story told and retold, passed from one generation to the next. As I imagined walking through the stadium months later, I saw the field empty once again. The seats were silent. The turf was marked with the imprint of cleats and the scattered remnants of celebration. The lights remained on, casting a warm glow across the quiet stadium. In that stillness, the field looked almost sacred. I imagined a lone staff member walking across the turf with soft footsteps, collecting stray towels and discarded tape, feeling the lingering presence of history. This space had held so much energy, so much heart, and now it held peace. I stopped in the center of the field and looked around. The sun was setting, casting warm colors across the sky. Shadows stretched across the turf like memories reaching forward in time. I thought about the early years, the rise, the turning point, the climb to greatness, and the season that captured the heart of the city. I felt a deep calm wash over me, the kind that comes from understanding a story all the way to its core. The resolution of the 49ers' journey was not a final chapter. It was a promise that greatness would never be taken for granted, a promise that every future player would carry the lessons of the past, a promise that the city would always stand with its team through highs and lows, victories and heartbreaks. The legacy lived beyond the scoreboard. It lived in the spirit of the people who believed. As I walked through the edge of the field for the last time, I turned back once more. The stadium was quiet, but it did not feel empty. It felt alive with everything the team had been and everything it could become. The story had found its peaceful end, but its meaning would echo through every future season. And as I stepped into the fading light, I knew I had witnessed something powerful, something timeless, something that would continue long after this moment had passed. The legacy of the 49ers was not finished. It had only begun.